Welcome back to day 2 of the USAF Open Access 2025 webinar series. It's really great to see so many of you joining us again today as we continue the conversation under the global theme, Who Owns Our Knowledge? Yesterday, we had 2 really insightful sessions that helped us reflect on where we are as a country when it comes to open access, the progress made, the challenges that remain, and the opportunities that lie ahead. So today our focus shifts to collaboration because we know meaningful progress in open access depends on working together. Whether it's collaboration between researchers, institutions, librarians, or policymakers, it's through partnership that we can strengthen our systems, share resources, and open up knowledge to the benefit of all. So thank you once again for joining us, for being part of this series. We hope it won't be the last, and for the important work you are each doing to advance openness and equity in research. It's now my pleasure to hand over to our session chair, Glenn Trurin, who will take us through the program for this morning. As you all know, Glenn is currently the SANLIC Director, a position he has held for more than a decade. He also holds an MBA from the University of Cape Town. Glenn has been actively involved in SANLIC's Open Access Transformational Agreements Task Team, and SANLIC itself is actively engaged in negotiating transformative agreements with selected publishers on behalf of its members. Glenn, thank you for your commitment to the open access agenda, and I'm going to give the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet, and welcome everybody. Janet, can you confirm you can see the program on the screen?
Absolutely, 100%.
Great. I thought before we zoom in on collaboration, we should just look at one or two items of what we covered on the previous 2 days. Let's start with we started with an outline of the South African open science policy, which Mr. Patel explained was in the last stages of being adopted by Parliament. I sincerely hope that the adoption does not take as long as the copyright bill. Because once that is finalized, I think that will be most helpful for the furtherance of open science. Professor Nechwera then discussed his perspective, and what I took out of that was the idea of incentivizing research differently, where funding should be prioritized towards the developmental impact of research, research that makes life and the world a better place, and to reward that ahead of pure research for the generation of knowledge. We then heard from various institutional perspectives. Ms. Danster presented the Chelsea perspective, and I recall collaboration being very high on the agenda there. The same with Mr. Molepo from LIASA, and the ASAP perspective from Mrs. Veldsman. And the big takeaway for me there was that only half of the journals were fully open access, and only 25% of the journals were Diamond Open Access. There was then a very constructive panel discussion, and then we moved into session 2, where we heard from the NRF funding perspective from Dr. Mchunu. I then presented what progress has been made with regard to read and publish agreements in terms of converting South Africa's research from being behind a paywall and becoming open access, and the funding implications thereof. We then heard from Dr. Raju who spoke about the African Platform of Open Scholarship and made a very impassioned case for Diamond Open Access as a preferential option for addressing issues such as colonialism and social justice, and forwarding the cause of African research. We then heard from Mr. Villen from Sweden, who explained the why and how of Sweden moving beyond transformative agreements and not wanting to participate in open access in hybrid journals. And that brings us to where we are focusing today on the question of stakeholder collaboration in pursuit of open access. And our first speaker is going to be Mr. van der Walt, Wynand van der Walt from Rhodes University. Wynand, we look forward to hearing what you have to say about collaboration for integrity. And over to you, Wynand, if you're there and ready.
Good morning, Glenn. Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes, loud and clear. Are you ready to share slides?
Yes, I'm going to share. Just give me a moment.
Right, we can see your slides and we look forward to you going into presentation mode.
Right, I think that's a presentation mode. That's now hamper something. There it is. Right, thank you, and good morning, everyone, to this second session of this, I think, incredibly important conversation. And over the past number of years, and I've been involved for a fair number of years in open access publishing, in the fight against the unfairness of the publishing industry, etc. But I want us today to actually just reflect on something else, and I will talk to you about not the predatory necessarily. I don't like the word predatory actually, because that sort of seems that we don't participate in predatory, but we do participate in questionable science practices. So when I say today predatory, I actually mean the broader term, which is questionable science, and I think we need to address it. To start off with, we know what the challenges are, but our focus keeps on being in the center of this picture that you currently see: the colonialism, capitalism, the gatekeepers, etc. Whereas very few pay attention to the little flower garden on the left, the epistemic exclusion. And that's where a lot of the challenges lie that leads to questionable science. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, looking at what are the challenges that are underlying that cause these behaviors. Before I continue, we all know this picture. We've seen it so often. And when we talk about open access, we really talk about equity, not equality. It's about equitable access to resources. However, this is not a complete picture. First of all, yes, this is already a step in the right direction, but this is often the reality, and especially for African scholars. And I think at the far right of the picture, you can see the little man with the purple shirt really dug a hole. And this is how I think we are placed in Africa when it comes to scholarship. And I want to say that I think South Africa is better placed than its counterparts across the continent when it comes to scholarship. And there's also a number of reasons for that, which I'm not going to go into today. But the reality is that you want to take things beyond equity. You want to take things towards liberation, first of all, but lastly, inclusion. And this is where a massive challenge is. And this is why we are often mere spectators to this global knowledge economy instead of being a very inclusive role player or stakeholder in the broader knowledge economy. Right, just going one step back, and I say here, social and epistemic justice, whereas open access aims to make knowledge free and available. Yes, we all know this. It promotes equality through removing the paywalls. It's looking at equity by addressing disparities, but it stops short of liberation and active participation. It does not fundamentally challenge the power imbalances that dictate whose knowledge is produced, valued, and circulated. And that's specifically the last two that causes a lot of challenges, why we end up with a lot of questionable science in the country, on the continent. We know that the mainstream publishing system pushes African scholars out. There's no doubt about it. There's sufficient evidence in so many ways. We've experienced it most probably as researchers, as scholarly entities across this continent. So what's the cause of this? So the epistemic justice, or injustice, I should rather say, is a combination of bias in the first place. And then second, it's come to the fore that article processing charges is a hampering factor, which creates an environment where African scholars are really not being able to break through the barriers, specifically as they are seeking career progression and global visibility. And that makes them vulnerable questionable publishing practices. The fact that the registration fees is actually another one that should be on this list. Registration fees, if you cannot get published, you cannot get your degree, your PhD, for instance, in certain of the African institutions, you have to re-register, but there's no funding to re-register at a personal level or at the scholarship level. Hence, let's take the risk. Let's push through and let us publish. So, what are the push factors? And I think once we understand the factors, the push factors, then we can understand what is it we need to do. First of all, we know that the acceptance rate for African scholarship, well, actually for low and middle income countries, are significantly lower than the top Western journals. In fact, you've got a 8% better chance, sorry, 8 times better opportunity to be published if you're from the north than from the south, and specifically from Africa. So what then happens? It causes frustration, this rejection process, because the legitimate pathways are often routinely blocked, and hence scholars seek alternative options, go to predatory. Another barrier is a geographic or topic bias, considering a lot of our research focuses on either the regional or the continental issues. And therefore, these things do not matter to the north. They relegate our outputs to smaller regional journals with low impact factors. Again, that causes limited visibility, and it does not satisfy the career pressure for international recognition. Again, another challenge. The third one is a lack of mentorship and resources, and I generalize here because I think this differs obviously from institution to institution. But we are aware of big research infrastructure, low research funding in certain areas, limited support for academic writing and statistics, and this causes a quality gap. Scholars may lack the training or the resources to produce these manuscripts to meet the high quality standards expected or demanded by the elite journals. So these are the 3 major push factors that pushes scholars towards questionable sciences practices, which is interesting. APCs has become the new financial wall. The paradox of open access is that it's intended to democratize knowledge, but Gold AI model shifts the cost from the reader to the author. And I'm not sure, this makes it more difficult. Previously, a lot of institutions in Africa couldn't afford to access journals. Now they can't afford to publish in these journals. Prohibitive costs, $1,500 to $2,500 it's not affordable for most institutions, and even at Rhodes, which I think in my view is a fairly well-endowed university, there's a limit to how much funding is made available for APCs. And if you don't, if you're not part of the first cohort of requests, you are not going to be part of the group that's allowed to use the APCs or fund for APCs. The funding gap, it's negligible in terms of global research grants and making it impossible to budget for high APCs. And there's a waiver insufficiency, and I put it in a chat box. There's inconsistent or non-existent waiver policies, especially for upper middle class income countries, in that this financial wall actually remains. This is an incredibly vicious cycle, and it goes back to the pressure to publish. I think I'm going further down, I'm mentioning this again, but there is enormous pressure to publish because it's your career progression, it's your recognition, reputation, institutional reputation. All of it depends on publication count, and we make so much noise about citation rates as being, and you've got to be cited. It sort of legitimizes the case for elitism in many ways. The rejection rate exclusion, our work on the continent is mostly rejected because of bias or it's unattainable. And this creates vulnerability, leading to the use of questionable science outlets, for instance, because they promise fast publication, low manageable APCs. And we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing in this garden that I mentioned earlier on to cultivate a different behavior? And the behavior is actually what's really challenging. And behavior is actually publish or perish. The dissemination of questionable science also means that our research becomes invalidated in many ways, becomes questionable because we use these outlets. And we're not the only ones. I think a number of the low-income countries have the same fate, and specifically, and sorry, I'll get back to something that Reggie said yesterday about how well the Latin Americans are doing, because they actually have established a different process, a different way of doing things. They publish for themselves, by themselves, and they facilitate the process. The cycle really ends with reputational damage, taints African scholarship, which means that we perpetuate this bias. We actually then provide the evidence for people to say, well, it was not unfounded, this bias was not unfounded. In fact, your scholarship is of a lower quality. So we have to be very careful in how we approach this. The impact is actually really cause concern. It's born from systemic inequality, undermines the quality, visibility, and trustworthiness of African scholarship, and feeds back into the process, into a very negative cycle. So what's the call to action? This morning's session is really about sharing responsibility, cultivating different behaviors, working together. And this is some of the call to action. And this was also, this speaks to what was said yesterday, is that we have to go back to the funders and the governments. We have to go back to the funding organizations and the policy authors. They say, well, who's driving this and how can we change this? The publishers themselves, they need to be very transparent when it comes to APC waivers for all low-income countries. In my view, they should just be waived for African researchers. And I think the step in the right direction is to say, in South Africa, if you're a South African publisher, please immediately waive all APCs for African scholars. In that way, we also become a reliant partner in the scholarly economy on the continent, and not one of the perpetuators of the problem. Institutions, librarians, I think we need to increase our training for scholars, identify predatory journals. Sometimes it's not always on purpose that you end up publishing in a predatory journal. There's a lot going on. We've done a lot of work about this. We even have created a checklist that's available to everyone. It's online that you can follow. But the problem is it still stems from behaviors, and the behaviors in terms of the institutional powers and drivers within the knowledge economy. All right, so what does this mean? How do we action this? Well, I believe African universities and institutions should invest in training. We should incentivize quality over quantity. We should not settle for green open access. We should not settle for bronze or any other color except diamond. I think that should be, as long as we have a multitude of choices, we will be divided in our intention and our efforts. And that's why I say just focus on diamond open access as the only standard in open access. International publishers and funders, there should be mandated equity, implement transparent, comprehensive, automatic APC waivers instant. Also, we should consider things like African Journals Online or other regional infrastructure, exactly like Reggie mentioned as well yesterday. African scholars, we should act as gatekeepers, and we should really prioritize quality over speed, quality over quantity. And government and research bodies, please increase research investment. I think that's a call that everybody asks for, but let's not divide the research funding to various institutions. We can use it collectively to produce a legitimate path that can support African scholars. And we should not be, in my view, we should also not just focus on Africa, I mean, sorry, my apologies, your country alone. It should be more than that. So we should start funding the growth of high quality, non-profit, regional African journals. And I think we've really taken one step in that direction. So the final thought on all of this is that true epistemic justice requires moving beyond access towards enabling active African and global South participation and inclusion in shaping and owning the global economy. because at this point of view, we are mere, in my view, we are used to some extent. And that extent is that we just watching what's going on without actively participating in the global knowledge economy. Thank you.
That was a very excellent way to introduce today's topic. Thank you so much, Wynand. Wonderful food for thought, and I trust that your presentation will be made available. We move right along to Professor Ahmed Bawa, who I've had the privilege of working with through looking at a transition to open access. And without further introduction, Prof. Bawa was the DUT Vice Chancellor and then the former CEO of University South Africa. And I see his slides already. So over to you, Ahmed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Glenn. Just trying to unmute a few other things. Start reading.
If you could share your video as well, that would be lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very
much.
much. Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much to Yusuf for inviting me to this meeting. And I've been out of the circuit for quite a long time, so in the South African circuit at least. So it really did kind of help me to just go back a little bit and think about what we had done earlier on and so on. So I just want to start out by saying that it's not that I have been completely out of the circuit, just really being an academic sort of changed my perspectives a little bit, not perspectives, but rather my work commitments and so on. But at the same time, I've kept a finger in the pie by working with the International Science Council and the International Association of Universities and so on. So, and together with Joy, who's also presenting today. So really pleased that we could share this together. So I was asked to just reflect on the National Declaration, Open Access, that was kind of presented at the USAF Higher Education Conference in 2019. And I went back to it and I thought, well, it was quite a good document, So and I just thought, well, of course, clearly it's several years, 6 or 7 years have passed now, and so there's a need for sort of renewal and so on. But still, there's some things to be learned from it, and in particular, I mean, I'll go to the next slide and just give me. And in particular, just the idea that we have to adopt a national approach to this challenge, that this can't be done at the institutional level. In fact, I would suggest that, that it has to span a kind of a whole range of social actors, including, of course, the main science-producing institutions. I mean, science in the broadest possible sense. And just to remind us, in fact, that when we worked on this declaration, we worked quite closely with USAF, of course, which kind of took the lead on it, with the research, NRF, with the ASAF, with DHET, DSI, CHELSA, and then of course SANLIC. And it was really a very interesting collaboration that kind of produced this declaration. I'm going to speed through this because it's just 15 minutes and I want to get to some points at the end. But the preamble was really about the fact that South Africa saw the issue of the role of information and knowledge as central to its developmental agenda. And of course, the NSI, which I still contend is underdeveloped, was really at the center of that imagination that information and knowledge would be the center of our developmental agenda. But what we are also seeing, of course, and well, we have been seeing for a long time now, is this diffusion of knowledge, and the use of knowledge, knowledge production, its application and its dissemination to a range of different social institutions. So it's no longer just within the academy, if you like, that there's the dominant use of of journals and other forms of scientific publishing. But more importantly, I just want to also say, that we do something really weird, right? Which is that we provide access to students, right? Undergraduate and postgraduate students, to all the resources in our libraries until the point they graduate. And then when they're at the point where they can put that knowledge to use, right? And use new knowledge to put to use, that's when we stop them access. Like, so there's something fundamentally problematic with that, and which we need to address. Right? And of course, what we're also seeing is this growing suspicion of experts around the world. We're seeing this attack on higher education in the USA at the moment, but not just in the USA, in other parts of the world. And we're also seeing the slide towards anti-intellectualism. And what this is saying, to some extent, is something that Wynand has kind of spoken about, which is this idea of kind of, this idea that knowledge can't be just contained in a particular sector, that we have to kind of begin to provide access to knowledge to broad communities and build their capacity to engage with that knowledge and so on. But secondly, just this idea that that it's not enough for the scientific community simply to produce papers which circulate in their own environment, that it has to be kind of really opened up. And of course, I just make the point that South Africa has adopted the open science philosophy to undergird the work of the NSI. Yeah, and then just to say, our system is still very, very has deep inequalities. We have an open science framework which is yet to be kind of really mobilized, and we really need to get back to that and get it done. And I'm pleased to hear that Imran said yesterday that that process is underway. And then, of course, just the whole issue around the fact that we've made huge progress in the last 4 or 5 years on open access, and it will be really incumbent on South Africa and Africa to be a huge part of that. I mean, because it's one thing to say we are excluded; it's another thing to say we want to participate in this reshaping of the new knowledge terrain, if you like. And then, I think we all agreed, in fact, that this very exploitative business model of the journal publishing houses really makes it impossible. Affordability is dropping at a phenomenal rate. Okay. So I'm not going to go through this in great detail because I see Janet has shared this with you yesterday. But just this idea that we have to work as a national collective, that it's not enough for us just to kind of really, say, get each institution to try and work out. And of course, SANLIC does a fantastic job, ASAF does a fantastic job, but it does seem to me that we need a national approach, that we have to aggregate resources, we have to bring together capacities that allow South Africa in Africa to kind of really galvanize as much impact as we can in this regard. And of course, we have to strengthen scholarly publishing and open access scholarly publishing wherever that's possible. And I think that we have to say, get our universities to agree and get our science system to agree, that we are going to shift towards an open access open access publishing models. And of course, there's a whole critique about the role of impact factors, the role of rankings, of course, and so on. And that critique is gaining ground. I think it's becoming more and more clear that the use of those impact factors and so on, that they are kind of seriously distorting the science system, and in particular, really kind of cutting away at the integrity of science and so on. There's a whole lot of data there that we can talk about. Which, I'm not going to go through the rest of this, just to say, oh, sorry. I just want to go back to that slide, sorry. I don't want to go through all of this, but the one point that I want to make is just this idea that we have to prevent the loss of copyright to the publishers. And that's something I think that, I think we should all really work on and try and ensure that that's the case. Yeah, and then just to say, what we have to do is work in concert with other science systems across the continent to try and ensure that this is not just a South Africa kind of initiative, but this is a continental initiative. And the point I wanted to make was that here, at least, is that it's not enough for us to complain about the fact that we are kept out of that global knowledge system. The question is, how do we get into it? I mean, we have to insist that we are part of it, and that that we're not kind of constantly in this kind of mode of pessimism, that we are being dominated and so on, but that we have to kind of seek ways of getting into that. And by the way, it's this, the whole science system now has really become much more multipolar. The opportunity for engaging with that knowledge system has never been greater. And that's something that we have to work towards. And the one point I just want to make here is that we have to adopt, that one point that the declaration made was that we have to adopt a phased approach to ensure that the adverse impacts on the NSI are minimized. And there, I think that if I had to write this again, or if we had to write this again, I think we would reshape that statement in particular. But the important thing of all of this was this idea of developing a properly defined roadmap. And we were in the process of doing that. And at that point, I left USAF and don't quite know what happened to that. But, there was a very strong kind of document that was emerging out of collaboration between the NRF, SANLIC, and USAF at the time, which I can't remember what the final position of that was. And we need to kind of go back to that, it seems to me. So in the periods, between then and now, of course, there's a whole range of things that have happened. And, as I mentioned, I was a part of the International Science Council project on opening the record of science. And, it was and Joy was also a part of that. And we had really kind of fascinating discussions and a whole lot of interaction with the industry and with the publishing industry and with science councils, with national systems and so on. So a huge amount of kind of input into that process. And what came out of that is kind of 8 principles. The first is that we must move towards universal open access. Secondly, that there must be open licenses for reuse. The third one was that there had to be rigorous peer review. And of course, the peer review issues, becomes much more kind of it's a much more interesting discussion now than it was a short while ago, with the idea that we could start beginning to look at the role of technology and so on in the review process. And in particular, just this idea that, the review process, is also a gatekeeping process, so we have to be careful about that. But at the same time, I mean, what we can't do is simply just allow kind of everything to go into publication mode, which hasn't been to some extent subjected to peer review, because of the accelerated kind of misinformation, disinformation channels that have opened up. In some ways, one of the biggest challenges we face, I mean, I know this sounds completely contradictory, but one of the challenges we face is the high level of democratization of communication through social media and so on, also undermines, if you like, the place of science in society. And we're seeing this now, for example, in the US and in other parts of the world. The fourth point was the concurrent access to data and observations. That actually it's not enough for us just to publish articles, but that the data has to go along with the publishing. And that's really to try and understand how to elevate 2 things: how to elevate integrity, but secondly, it's to try and ensure that we can produce replicability of results. And so it's complete, and of course, to increase efficiency. So this concurrent access to data and observations with publications is a critical one. That there must be long-term accessibility. So we shouldn't be going from one system to another system, which then kind of cuts off access to the old system, if you like, that there should be long-term accessibility, that there will have to be some respect for disciplinary traditions while promoting interdisciplinary connections. In other words, saying that, that the publishing models that we adopt must actually take into account the differences in disciplinary traditions. And then this whole idea of flexible and adaptable publication systems, especially in the context of this digital technology era that we are in. And finally, and perhaps this is the most important one, that there has to be governance accountability to the scientific community. And that seems to me to be the critical thing, that actually we have to go back to this notion that the scientific community should take responsibility for the governance of the scientific publishing, if you like. And I think that the critical one about governance, and there were long discussions on this at the International Science Council, and that is that they kind of really, that there was a need for us to try and ensure that the governance model has this multipolar effect to it, if you like. I'm just about to complete now the IAU, that's the International Science Council. The International Association of Universities has another project, had another project called on open science, with a lot of emphasis on open access. And then you've seen the UNESCO declaration. Just some very briefly, just some other shifts. First of all, the national funding stresses continue. In fact, they are deepening. So we have to find solutions. I mentioned earlier this idea of the geopolitical multipolarity in science, and that the global scenario is changing, and that we have to be on top of that, and to understand how Africa fits into that multipolar scenario. And I think that, just to remind ourselves, a few years ago, if you asked us, where was the center of gravity of the international publishing world, it would have been in the mid-Atlantic somewhere. Well, it's not there anymore. It's shifted decidedly to the east. South Africa, Africa is still very much underrepresented, so we've got a lot of work to do. And then just this idea that we have to try and understand how Africa and the global south fit into that multipolar system. There's the impact of geopolitical fracturing. What that is going to do to the science system is not unknown anymore. It's frightening, and we have to pay attention to that and pay attention to the role of scientific publishing in that. And then we are seeing the gradual but definite erosion of these instruments of globalization, rankings, impact factors, and so on. Just yesterday or day before yesterday, Cambridge published an article, which looked at kind of this idea that less is more, meaning that actually we're publishing too much. We need to veer away from that. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier these large analyses which point towards a breakdown of integrity at scale, and we can talk about that. That's really a devastating new phenomenon. It's not a new phenomenon, but it's a devastating phenomenon. And then, of course, this exponential rise in research outputs has not really kind of produced exponential increase in new knowledge. Like, in fact, we're seeing a huge kind of, while new knowledge production is pretty flat, the research output. So we have to ask ourselves what is going on. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you, Glenn. Hope that was useful.
That was certainly useful. Thank you so much, Prof. And thank you for stopping there, because I was about to ask you to wrap up. I think it was wonderful to get an update of that national declaration. And it's really interesting to me. I didn't realize that Joy had been working with you on that declaration at the International Science Council. Joy, I think everybody knows who you are, so I'm not going to give you an introduction. And I'm delighted that you'll be talking about the UNESCO recommendations on open science, so that we can hold that up against what Dr. Bauer has presented, and take that into the panel discussion. So over to you, Joy.
Thank you so much. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's coming up.
All right. So I will thank you so much, everybody, for giving me the opportunity to speak in today's webinar. So I will be giving an overview of the UNESCO recommendations on open science as a basis for collaboration, using a case study of TCC Africa, what we've been doing over the years, and how we've done that to help create actionable outputs on the implementation and adoption of open science in some of the countries we are working on in Africa. So I'm the Executive Director of the Training Center in Communication. It's a research capacity trust based at the University of Nairobi. It's an 18-year-old trust. And we have 4 focal areas: open science and advocacy, which I'll be talking about; open infrastructure, where we are promoting fair data sharing through the Africa PID Alliance, and we are producing African-originated persistent identifiers. We are currently going through use cases with some of the universities who have been represented here. We produced a persistent identifier called DocID, and we are truly excited about it, where data stays in Africa, and it is a technology created out of open systems. Capacity building, where we train early career researchers in scholarly and science communication. And also finally, our other focal area is on higher education stakeholder engagement, where we drive partnerships to develop innovative and sustainable solutions in higher education. That is our mission, objectives, and our values on how we work with various stakeholders, and it's pertinent to how we forge collaborations with various stakeholders. So using the case study of our Open Science Advocacy Program, we're in partnership with PLOS, and our Open Science Advocacy Project is called Advancing Open Science in Africa. And why this is, okay, and it started in 2021. And why this project is important and why did we see that we needed to work together? It's because, number one, open science matters for the continent, and to begin with, open access to data and research outputs empowers policymakers. We understand we've been hearing the same narrative from yesterday till today. It helps in reducing inequalities in access to knowledge. It helps in strengthening Africa's global position in science. It helps in enhancing visibility of African research, but it also helps in promoting collaboration and knowledge sharing. And it also builds trust and transparency in research. We've been talking about this best part of the last couple of days. Now, our partnership. As I said, we started in 2021, and the objective was to amplify the representation of African research in global scholarly publishing. And also the focus is to enhance the visibility and accessibility of African research through open and inclusive practices that align with local contexts and values. So both organizations, that is PLOS and TCC, are united in their commitment to democratizing research and advancing open science across higher education in Africa. Now, we are very strategic on how we look at on the kind of collaborations we create, especially in the advancement of open science. Because the way we are working on the adoption of open science is in 3 ways. Number one, at policy level, so either regional or national, then at higher education leadership level, then at researcher level, where we are working with various partners to build communities on that. Now, this slide that you're seeing is focusing on policy at regional level, national level, and also higher education leadership level. So one of the things we noticed is that in order for effective adoption of open science national instruments, we had to be very careful how to call them. So we didn't want to call them policies, we didn't want to call them frameworks, we didn't want to call them national strategies until the government decides to name it. Because over the years, we've noticed that countries are very careful about how to call these national instruments. So we felt that calling it a national instrument was a safe space because we come in as technical advisors. So one of the ways, the way in which we create the collaboration is we start with the regional STI or commercial blocks. So in East Africa, we partnered with the East African Science and Technology Commission, and the East African Science and Technology Commission reports the East African Parliament, East African Community Parliament. And the good thing about the continent is that we do have 3 community parliaments. We have the ESC, we have ECOWAS, and we have the SADC. So in the ESC, under IASTECO, we helped create the first STI policy, which has open science, making it the first of its kind in Africa. So it involved 7 presidents, 7 ministers, and that was signed. And out of that, the IASTECO mandated each country in East Africa to work closely with us in coming up with national instruments of their choice pertaining to open science. So it starts with a dialogue, and then it comes to coming up with the activities that the country has signed, has considered as a priority to come to creating a national instrument. So in Kenya, we worked with the Ministry of Education. In Tanzania, we are working with the Ministry of Education and the Tanzania Commission of Science and Technology. In Uganda, we are working with Makerere University, the Ministry of Education, and the Uganda National Council for Science and Technology. So these are the ones we've started working on for now. So we've got 4 more countries in East Africa to go. So and each of these countries, they were very clear. The governments were very clear on how they wanted to start. So in Tanzania, we had the dialogue in 2023. In February 2023, and then the government stated that their national instrument will be a journal guideline on publishing, so that they can reduce the inequity in publishing and adopt open access and open science practices. So what we successfully did was that we worked with the government. As you can see, they didn't want a national policy; they wanted document that would be adopted immediately by all the universities and the research institutions. So we created the first national journal dialogue. I mean, the journal guidelines. And what makes this unique from most guidelines that exist today is that we included open science principles in it. So it has, and then out of it, it has been presented by the board of the council. Now it is just waiting signing by the Minister of Education. So this is, and of course, Tanzania is going through elections now, so we are waiting for that to be done. Now, out of that, they said, out of that dialogue, they wanted training of their editors. So in August, together with the government and the University of Dar es Salaam, we did the first national training for all their journals, and that is their editors, their publishers, on how they can understand best practice on equitable publishing, how they can improve the quality of their journals so that they can be included in the guidelines. So that is a very strategic way on how we are adopting open science. So it's just not an issue of, yes, you've got a framework, congratulations. No, it has to be actionable outputs which can be adopted by the community. So we are really proud of what is happening in Tanzania. In Kenya, we did a national dialogue, and the government of Kenya wanted a national strategy document on open science, and that is now what we are currently working on, and it is being led by the National Commission for Science, Technology and Innovation, which makes it quite easy, because when you're looking at the adoption, they'll be working closely with the NRF, the National Research Fund in Kenya, to make sure that these practices are adopted. And in Uganda, they wanted the support the other way around, where they say that the government said that they were having conversations on open science, but it was fragmented. So they wanted a national survey to do a mapping on all the stakeholders in open science, which we did between July and August of this year with the Ministry of Education and the Uganda National Commission of Science and Technology. And together with us, TCC and PLOS, we created a survey which was sent out nationally. And out of that, we had the first conversation with all the stakeholders who are identified. And that meeting led to the open science principles that will be included in the Tertiary Higher Education Act within the government of Uganda, of which the Ministry of Education stated that they wanted that included within they are currently amending they wanted it, open science, to be included within the act. In West Africa, we are working with ECOWAS. They mimicked what we did in East Africa, so we work closely with them to include open science principles in the ECOPOS, that is the regional open science document. It's STI ESC, the STI document, policy document. So open science has been included, so it's just waiting signing. We are working with the government of Liberia. The government of Liberia wants the same kind of support like what we are providing Tanzania. The government of Ghana as well, we worked with them on that, on advocacy on open science and also research integrity. And of course, with the Association of African Universities supporting the higher education leaders, whom we worked with also in Southern Africa with the University of Pretoria and University of Cape Town. And they invited two governments to speak. That is South Africa, the South African government. We had representatives from DHET, also from Namibia, Council, the Research Council in Namibia. North Africa is quite interesting. Yes,
Joy, I'm sorry to interrupt. You've got 2 more minutes.
That's okay. North Africa is very interesting because we are having governments reaching out to us to see how we can support them in adoption of open science principles or creation of open science instruments. Now, the open science, why the open science stakeholder collaboration matters for us is because we are trying to avoid duplication of efforts, which we've been seeing a lot happening in the continent, increasing greater visibility, collective solutions, coming up with collective solutions, having broader engagement, inclusivity, and efficiency and alignment, which has been shown by how closely we are working with the governments. We are building communities, open science communities across the region, and through collaborations, it is building sustainable partnerships, and we have shared collaboration and shared learning. We have collaborative networks, and then in turn, we are also having collaborative actions as well. So this is all cyclic, and we are seeing this from the strategic partnerships we've created. Why is it vital to engage in open science? As I wind up, number one, we are looking at the way we've strategically created these partnerships. It's fostering sustainability. We don't want this to be just talk shops, because there've been a lot of talk shops. We need practical, tangible outputs on open science, whether it is instruments that are being used, national instruments. It's just not, we had a workshop, we had a dialogue, but we want sustainability in open science. We want to support policy alignment. So it's listening to the governments and asking, how do you want this implemented? So before we were just saying, oh, you need a policy. No, it is, how do they want it implemented? So we are working in the alignment of policy, enhancing inclusivity, building trust, and all this is driving collaboration through the various strategic partnerships we are providing. So thank you so much. And as I wind up, all I have to say is that when we are building any kind of collaborations on open science, yes, UNESCO has set the pace. We need to be strategic on how that is going to be done so that we avoid talk shops, because the buy-in is already there. We are in the stage of implementation. So we need to have strategic partnerships in producing actionable outputs that can be implemented by the communities that we are targeting on the continent. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Joy, and it's a delight that you've highlighted the UNESCO recommendations in the context of what's going on in Africa in terms of collaboration. And I think that we need to now zoom in on South Africa in terms of how are we collaborating with the rest of Africa, and I think more importantly, how we're collaborating among ourselves to further open science. So I would like to ask the other presenters to join Joy by switching on your cameras and your mics, as well as the presenters from yesterday to do so as we move into a panel discussion. So the focus of the panel discussion is, in the light of the UNESCO recommendation on open science, is the National Declaration on Open Science that Prof. Bawa presented, as well as the International Science Council update, as well as what he identified as the most recent developments. Does that make the National Declaration on Open Science a valid blueprint for collaboration? If so, why? And if not, why not? And what are the obstacles and challenges, and how should we overcome them? So far I can only see Ahmed and Joy. I don't know where, there's Andrew. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us. Vainant, I can't see Vainant. I can't see Susan. Where to? Charlie, so that we've got
Susan is
representatives.
here.
Oh, I can't see everyone on the same screen. Sorry.
Yeah, Susan is here. I'm looking for where to.
Great. Where to? And Charlie? I can't see Charlie. And all right. I think that's most people. But I think perhaps, Prof, if you could start so that you can get a step ahead of the others before they shout you down. You have, in a way, in your talks, identified what could be updated. But do you consider the National Declaration on Open Access as a blueprint for collaboration, or how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be clear that the declaration that that we presented in 2019 was really to try and galvanize kind of a national kind of approach, if you like, to open access and in particular, like to try and uh, build collaboration across the institutions. I mean, as we all know, it's a very fragmented system, and so one of the I think one of the critical points was, should this, which we didn't kind of broach in the declaration itself. One of the points that we have to consider is whether we make this a kind of national approach, which kind of leaves it to the institutions to kind of uh, you know aggregate resources and then sort of negotiate on a better basis and so on, or whether we say to the government, here's an opportunity for you, kind of, why don't you sort of top slice a part of the research budget, the national higher education and research budgets, and then we can use that as a way of negotiation. Of course, the con with that, of course, is that the universities then and the science councils then begin to kind of really have less and less control over that process. So,
Yeah.
so that's a debate I think that still needs to happen. But
Yeah.
I think what's becoming more and more clear is that this isn't just about South Africa, right? This is now it's about the global South, like really, and Africa, of course, is a part of the global South. So the for me at least, and I think Wynand kind of really did kind of broach this question, which is that there is actually the wherewithal, in South Africa to generate sufficient resources to address, the issue of open access in a way that kind of can facilitate this collaboration in much better ways, much stronger ways, if you like. Yeah. And I think that maybe this is where the shift needs to take place. I mean, the work that Joy and others are doing on the continent are absolutely fantastic. But what we can't do is simply stay out of the global system, because that global system is steamrolling to new models and new approaches. And if we just simply say, look, you know what, let's get our act together so that we can somehow influence that, it's just not going to happen. We have to be in those discussions to really shape that global system in a way that doesn't alienate the Africa and the global South, if you like. And I think that that the whole issue around this emerging multipolarity, the emerging global fragmentation, the geopolitical fragmentation, the whole challenge around the speeded up misinformation, disinformation, and all of that. I think these open up the way, for Africa to enter this terrain in a way which we haven't been able to in the past. The possibilities are just much stronger. The what you call it, uh, the hierarchical position of the global North, in particular the West, like is really in a different position now. I mean, I'm sure you all know the numbers, right? I mean, China now produces almost 1.5 times the research outputs as America does, as the US does. India has just overtaken India has just overtaken Germany, I think,
Yes.
in terms of research outputs. So, you know, there's a massive change taking place in that terrain.
Mm.
We are still very tiny in comparison with those big enterprises. But on the other hand, we can we can sit back and say, let's just get our house in order, and then we'll kind of, there's a risk associated with that, because actually that global system is really kind of pushing ahead at a rate which is deeply concerning. I mean, the next project at the ISC now, by the way, that declaration, those 8 principles and the document which is called Opening the Record of Science, which Joy and I were involved in, that was adopted by the International Science Council. That's really what that says, is that it's the big global buy into that. The next project is precisely how do we put that into effect? Now, yeah, we can either sit back and say, yeah, well, let's wait for that, or we can say we have to get involved in that.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And Joy, perhaps over to you from your perspective.
No, pretty much what Professor Bauer said. I'm in line with it. But at the end of the day, it's what are the next steps? So we have this amazing document, and what are the practical ways in which we can adopt it? And that is really through collaborations. And the fact that we are now competing with no longer the global north, but the likes of India and now China. And also technology is advancing so fast, even in research and even in scholarly communication. We need to also ask ourselves, also as a continent, what are we doing to advance these conversations, even in involvement in open infrastructure, so that we stop being recipients. We have this amazing declaration, its implementation, but also technology is developing in scholarly communication. So we need to ask ourselves, what are we doing to contribute other than just being recipients of the technologies? What are we doing to make sure that we are part of these conversations when it comes to producing technologies that will support the scholarly communication ecosystem, that will aid in the use of open science systems as well. So it's time for us to actually put on to strap on our boots and start marching actively, because the declaration is out there, the principles, the declaration on open science is out there, the principles are out there. So we've been given a foundation. So we need to start looking at strategic ways and partnerships on implementing these next steps.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Joy. And I think something that's perplexing me, and I'd like to open that to the entire floor to see who wants to respond, is who should coordinate South Africa's efforts to collaborate? I think that some of the collaboration will be organic, and it sounds like everybody is aligned on the principles. But I think the devil is in the detail. And so over to the rest of the panel, who should coordinate our collaboration towards open science?
If I may have in, Glenn, good afternoon, Susan Veldsman speaking. Who should coordinate? Just want to mention, not being definitive perhaps in my answer, and that is to say, which did not come out yesterday, in terms of the open science policy. In that policy, it's actually envisioned that there should be a national body coordinating all these efforts. Now, the policy is not clear as to whom and where it should nestle, but provision has been made, and there's also recognition in the fact that there's an overall coordinating body necessary for something like this. And we have to be careful, who do we select to coordinate that particular body? We have many stakeholders that has a role to play in opening science, etc. And meaning it's not just universities, it is research councils, it is NGOs, it is other NPOs, it is other society organizations, and we must just make sure that whoever that body is that eventually coordinates this, that we encompass all the different stakeholders in this play of field. So I just want to mention that. And secondly, I am a little bit concerned is that we still just focus on open access. We have transformed, we have migrated to a much larger concept of open science, because as soon as we just say open access, we start excluding all the other very important initiatives globally. If I just think about open infrastructures, that's such an important initiative as well in the Berlin or the Barcelona Declaration. Sorry, then we start wading also into other aspects of also journal publishing, like metadata, the sharing of data, etc. So I just want to say, can we just be very careful in how we actually position this particular statement if we do decide to actually issue a statement? And I think a statement at this point in time would be crucial. As much as you ask the question, the much we ask the question, and we live very close to the DSTI. We report directly to the DSTI. And I have been in the open access world from 2005. So you can imagine how frustrated I am with this policy or this framework not being released yet and not getting a good sense of why. I can guess perhaps why, but it does sort of, especially if I look at the multilaterals and the bilaterals that South Africa is involved in, it's critical that we as a country have a particular signal to the rest of the world. And I think then we will find that we would, at least come together and we will put our forces together is to work on this case. And I think the whole fragmentation and decentralization of the open science world in South Africa is because we cannot see the benefits of it. Why should we push it? We're not getting any rewards. We're not getting any financial support. And I'm going to stop there. But that is sort of my question. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. And I like your question. Now, who should actually take this forward? Thank you.
Right. Okay. And I have some other questions, but I'm glad to see Wynand wants to follow up. Wynand, please put your camera on. While he's doing that, if I could encourage everybody, we're going to open up this discussion to the floor. Please either post your questions in the chat or raise your hand if you would like to get ready to participate in an open discussion. Wynand, over to you.
Thank you, Glenn. I hope you can hear me quite well. There's a bit of a noise in the background.
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
All right, but I think I want to add to what Susanna said. It's what I picked up is when I spoke about the bias early on in my presentation, I think there's also, we need to recognize there's a bias on this continent, and there's also bias when it comes to our institutions. One of the greatest hindering factors that we work with actually is the competitiveness, and in my view, quite often egos, because the egos do push certain things like we want to be the best, we want to be the first, etc. And maybe we should really have a very in-depth introspection period where we analyze what are we doing to really contribute effectively as opposed to competitively. Maybe that's the first step we can take. So, well, what's in place? And let us, even if we have to close down for instance certain options like our institutional scholarship profiles, portals, and let's say use one singular one, things like that, we can start working collectively and towards a response instead of being competitive all the time. Yeah,
thank you, Wynand. I saw Charlie's hand up. Charlie, please put your camera on. I'm in every crisis, there always seems to be a significant amount of opportunity. And to me, some of the most obvious opportunities that are presenting ourselves are being presented to Africa is, number one, our growth, just even in our growth of population. Number two, the development of artificial intelligence. and how that technology could perhaps help us to leapfrog in terms of specifically scholarly communication and coordination. And thirdly, I think that the fact that things are at a completely different price in Africa compared to the global north, there, to me, seems to be a massive opportunity for publishing, increasing participation in publishing from the global south. But Charlie is next, and then I'm hoping Andrew could respond to that. Charlie, please put your camera on and go for it. What's happened to Charlie? Okay, we'll come back to him. Andrew, please go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you, Glenn. And thanks, everyone. Very good to see all of you. Glenn, I don't have answers to most of the questions you asked, but it seems to me that along with these principles, the principles in this declaration, which I don't think anyone here has any problem with. Obviously, the way in which it's framed and the support for the outcome is what differentiates us. And perhaps what we need is something like a problem statement before we begin to talk about coordinating things. Something that lists exactly what the points of departure are. And we tried to do this in our session yesterday. I completely agree with Suzanne. I think I'm not really sure. I find it incredibly frustrating that these conversations go on. And we should be doing things around this. Again, what came up in our session was this coordination, this lack of coordination. And I think it's a misnomer to talk of just government, because there are gaps between DST, DHET, DTI, some of which we raised in there. So I think a problem statement might be a way of, instead of trying to get a coherent government position or universities position, obviously there'll be shared things there, but I think that the details of that difference really matter, because if we don't resolve, if the stakeholders don't feel that all of their concerns are adequately or at least sufficiently addressed, or could be at a certain point, then you're going to have principal support as we have. Sorry, Glenn, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to take up a lot of time, but I just wanted to say just something about strengthening and enriching and allowing the capability for publishing to happen here. I know we think it's just simply a matter of authorship and dissemination, and there are a whole bunch of stuff that needs to happen in between then. I'm pointing to the role of publishers here. And I know it seems like a slightly insane ask, but if it's possible for the South African publishing, and it won't fix everything, it's quite right. We engage with the wider world. There are things we can do, there are things we can't do. But I don't think it's as ludicrous a suggestion to think that South African publishers, South African publishing could be enabled to take on some of this responsibility and some of the tasks afforded to this. It's no less ridiculous than suggesting that publishing could happen through libraries, and we've seen how that's beginning to work now. Thanks.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
You.
Thank you.
Charlie, over to you.
Yeah, Glenn, I actually I lost the network, but what I wanted to talk to mainly is the whole issue around the coordination, because I feel strongly that during the tenure of Professor Bauer as CEO of USAF, we were making, as I mentioned yesterday, we were making a headway as a country. My thinking is that the people that probably have the clout to the coordination, I would think that both USAF and ASAF, because of the status that they have on the government side and on the higher education side, and then obviously because of the subcommittees in higher education, the CHELSA, I think there should be there should be a permanent committee of some sort that would work on the coordination. So we have a permanent, an existing reference group with a remit that would then push this process forward. That would be my concrete suggestion.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so I think we've identified some of them, but
Glenn, may I
given-
come in just for a second?
yes, please do.
Yeah, no, it's not just, yeah. I think the points raised by Susan and Andrew are really important. I mean, but I want to make 2 points. I mean, the one is that, you know, first of all, I mean, I just want to say that that ISC process and the IAU processes and the UNESCO processes, although, you know, we've been focusing on open access, are really open science projects. I mean, the open access was a part of that enterprise. But what I wanted to say was that 2 points. I mean, you know, open science has different meanings for different kind of, you know, social actors. You know, so one of the dangers that we face, you know, is that we've left the open science enterprise largely to government. I mean, we've said, you know, government, you know, you take it through cabinet and everything else. Right? That's a really huge risk, like, because, you know, government's intentions with open science might be very different from kind of, you know, the ideological position that might emerge in the universities and the science councils and so on. So this idea that, you know, we should leave it to government is a very dangerous kind of position, and we should really be much more forthright in kind of in addressing the issues of open science at our universities and our science councils and so on. So that's the one point I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to make was that you know, what we have to contend with at the end of the day is this kind of corporatization of the knowledge system. I mean, that's what, you know, and at the heart of this whole open science project has to be this idea that we should be focusing on the public good of science. That this is not about, you know, government development projects. This is not about the military industrial complex and so on. That, you know, that this is really about driving the public good role of science. But that has to underpin the way we think about open science. If we don't do that, then it'll go into a direction which is completely, you know, antithetical, if you like, you know, to the purposes of science, if you like, in my view. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a very pertinent point, Prof. Thank you so much. You know, that we don't lose sight of what it's all about. I listened to a fascinating TED talk by a computer scientist who spoke about the contributions of each one of us to the development of the world. And he related it back to the origins of the Earth and how the Earth became habitable, and that millions of organisms, their contribution was to produce some oxygen that eventually made life on Earth habitable. And he brought it right to the present, and implied that the only thing that we will leave behind is our participation in generating knowledge, and he stressed that we all have a contribution to make. So the problem, obviously, that you've raised is the different interest groups that might detract from the common good. Susan, I'll come to you now, but I don't know if anyone wants to comment on what other impediments are there that we need to pay attention to make sure that we make progress on open science. Does anyone want to take that question? Okay, I think let's go to Susan.
Sorry, ask that again. So ask that again.
Joy?
Ask that question again, please.
What are the impediments? What is preventing the implementation of an open science policy. What is getting in the way of being able to get traction on collaboration around an open science policy?
So these are my observations because we've been working very closely with the governments. In the beginning, what we were seeing was that we were coming to the governments with the proposition of creating a policy or a framework without understanding how it aligns with the existing policies. So lack of policy alignment is one of the observations I've noted that cause delays in the adoption of open science policies. Living in a continent that is, I don't want to say it's volatile, but there's a lot of organizational change within the leadership, within the governments. One of the things we need to do is identify champions within the respective strategic partners that we are working with, especially if you're targeting at the government level, at the supranational level, at the national level. You need to have a champion or a set of champions such that if there's organizational change happening, you have this there's institutional memory and you have these continuous conversations. But other than that, the real fear is what is the return on investment for open science? And yes, we do know what the return on investment is, but let's be critical and say and rephrase it on what is the return on investment on open science attaining research assessment. So what's in it for me? Am I going to get a promotion? Am I going to get funding? We are yet to answer those questions. And that could be a reason why the adoption of open science is a bit sluggish. We need to look at, like in the case of South Africa, it needs to be very clear within the D8 and also within your assessment processes that yes, we're including open science. These are the points that will be included that will lead to extra funding or to lead to a promotion. That needs to be clear. And you do have that already in place. You do have the assessment processes. I'd like to give an example of Egypt, because now we are beginning to work with Egypt. And what we noted was that as much as Egypt is leading also when it comes to open access, thanks to the EKB, the Egyptian Knowledge Bank, it's still not been adopted. Open science has not been adopted at university level. Why? Because the elements of assessment have not been put in place. So we need to have clear return on investment pertaining assessment if we want to successfully adopt open science. So number one is policy alignment, but then number two is we need to have clear return on investment on assessment. Otherwise, we will have countries like which we are seeing in South Africa and also Egypt. You're supporting structures on open science, but the actual adoption is not happening. The actual adoption is not happening. So you're still struggling to still get buy-in.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joy. Susan, over to you, and then there are one or two people on the floor I hope will participate.
Thank you, Glenn. So I want to weigh in between what Professor Bawa said in last time he spoke and what Joy has just sort of related to us. And Prof. Bawa, I absolutely agree with you. You know, we must not embed this whole initiative into the state. We're running really some risks there, especially in terms of independency, etc. But I think, let me just rephrase perhaps my plea then for to include open science as well, is to change it rather. Can we rather advocate also for a far better openness, which does not really is specific then just to open science as such, and just try to sort of navigate a little bit away from what it could imply if we just go for open science as well. But I think the term openness is very important. And then I also want to sort of relay the question of what is the impediments, what keeps us back for not going through with this particular policy? I would say definitely perhaps some very strong leadership, really a huge advocate, a person that could that bring these things together. That although we are working in decentralized environments, I just find that the competition is too big, and we would rather do our own thing than to unite in this particular endeavor. So that's very important. And I really would like to also agree with Joy to say, what incentivizes us, not monetary necessarily, but what incentivizes in the system to go open, to be more open, and to share and to collaborate, etc. I don't think there's much. There are a few institutions across South Africa that looks at transdisciplinarity, etc., and has units and that promotes and train the researchers in transdisciplinarity, which is one component of openness and working across solving societal problems. So definitely, what incentivizes us to actually drive this particular initiative? Thank you, Glenn.
Thanks so much, Susan. I'm going to take one last input because we have run out of time, and then we'll close. Stephanie, please go ahead with your thoughts.
Thank you, Glenn, and I will be brief because I have to say I didn't listen to the first part of this presentation. I was doing another one of my own, but I've listened to lots of discussion around all of this: open access, open science, open publishing. And one of the things that I perceive and I experience often is a lack of understanding on the part of the individual researchers, the people who are generating knowledge, and in particular, how we train our postgraduates and our postdocs in terms of generating knowledge, their data and their IP, but we give them the message that it must be closely managed. It must be managed through a university system. It's owned by the university or the institution. And so the message that we're giving our researchers is that the data is, in fact, should be sealed in sealed vaults as opposed to being made open. And I think there's just a lack of understanding of how that balance can be attained. And so researchers are not informed.
Well, that's a fascinating way to end the discussion, and clearly one of the impediments that we definitely need to address going forward. It's a pity we don't have more time. I have 20 questions that were suggested that we couldn't even touch on, we are now at the end of the University South Africa Open Access Week webinar on Who Owns the Knowledge. I would like to thank all of you, and not only the presenters, but especially those of you who've given of your time to be a part of this discussion. I trust that there'll be follow-ups of keeping the information available, and I trust that the leaders in the various organizations will be working out how to collaborate and how to take this further and how to accelerate our transition to open access for the benefit of all and our planet. Thank you so much, everybody. Wishing you a wonderful weekend ahead. God bless everyone. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you so much. Thanks, Glenn.
Bye-bye.
Janet, thank you so much. And thank you to you and Tanya for doing an amazing job. Well done. I'm leaving the chat. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks so much, Glenn.
Bye.
Thanks, Tanya.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
We will be making a report available of all the presentations and all the important take-homes from the session. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. I'll be expecting to receive that. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you so much for participating. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.